Hey everybody, Tim from Tadabase here. Welcome to another episode of Build It with Tim. On today's episode, we're going to be kind of diving into the nitty-gritty of the data builder and best practices and techniques for creating data tables, and specifically, when is it appropriate to break apart a single data table into a second data table. There's two main reasons that I want to talk about here for why you would ever take a single data table and split it into two different data tables. First reason is you want to add additional properties to a specific field inside of a data table. And the second reason you might want to do this is so that you can give your end users more control over a specific property inside your published application. So let's dive into the builder and start taking a look at what these examples actually look like. Now, here is our data that we're working with. We're dealing with product data, and it's stored in a single table. And then we have 5 fields that define each property of this particular product. So we have the product ID, the product name, the cost, the sale price, and the category. And then we're going to be focused specifically on this product category field. Right now, inside this data table, the product category is stored inside of a single select field, meaning we are given a drop down of a bunch of different options that we can choose to define the product category. Now, when we're actually looking at our live application with this particular setup, everything is completely fine. I'm not saying that anything is actually wrong with this particular setup. However, if you want to add additional functionality or additional properties about the particular product category, then in this particular case, you are absolutely limited. The most common use case where you'd want to add additional properties to something stored inside of a select field would be when you want to do calculations on that particular value. So if we wanted to know how many products do we have in any given category, we could look that up by using something like a card component. Okay, I could add a component to the page that will do that calculation for me on the fly. But I'd have to add a condition to say when the product category is whatever it is that I want to count. So instead, the easier way to do that would be to actually split the categories from this particular data table into a second data table. To do this, we can simply create a new data table that contains all of our product categories that are stored within our select field. Now that we have all of our categories stored as separate records in a separate data table, our data structure has now become more dimensional, meaning we used to have only a single data table that stored every single property that we needed. This is known as a flat data structure, but now that we have more than one table, we now have two different kind of dimensions within our data structure that we can now work with. In order to communicate between these two data tables to say this product belongs to this category, we need to now add a connection field to our product data table. Adding a connection field to this table is going to help us build that pathway to define that additional property when that property lives outside of our current data table. After adding this new connection field, I've re-imported all of the product data, and you can see that our product categories now, they appear very similar where you have an actual drop-down where you can select an item to define the category. However, that category now lives in a completely different data table. So I know we went off on a little bit of a tangent there about what we needed to do to get ourselves to this point, but now that we are here, we can now define our additional properties for our product categories. For instance, in this case, we might want to add another field that says, whether or not this category is active or inactive. We can also start doing those calculations that we talked about where we want to see how many products per category we have. And we can do that by using a complex formula or a roll-up field to look into a connected data table to count how many records there are for that particular object. Okay, and by defining these additional properties, We are starting to give ourselves way more context and way more ability for how we are manipulating and using the data inside of our application. Now, the second reason I mentioned at the beginning of this video as to why you might want to split a data table into two separate data tables is to give your end users the ability to manipulate specific properties for a particular record or inside of a data table. When I'm an end user of this published application, I can add a new product to my product data table. I can give that product a name, a cost, a sale price, and of course, I can select one of the categories that I have in my category data table through my connection field dropdown. But what if I want to give my end user the ability to add a different category that's not currently present? Well, it's absolutely possible to do now that we have these two separated data tables and connected them using a connection field. But to do that, we're going to go back to our builder and we can go into our form where the connection field is that the user is going to select. And we can click on it and say allow inserting a new category. This will add a new form to the actual application that when we go back and we revisit this, we can say, well, you know what? I don't see lawn and garden, so I'm going to add that as a category. Now, when I add my product, we're going to have both records saved. We're going to have the product saved and we're going to have the new category saved. And we can just double check that by going back into our data builder. We can see that we now have the lawnmower and a brand new category with our additional properties. And so that's all I have for you today on Build It with Tim. Just some helpful information. If you ever get to that roadblock where you're building out your application and you're wondering, how should I continue? Should this be saved within data table A, or can I split it and save it into data table B? Through the use of connection fields to then relate those two data tables together, we can facilitate so many features that can become endlessly powerful inside of your application. All right, so thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.